Thank you, Inga, and welcome to everyone to the Democrats Abroad Meet the Candidates event presented by the Californians Abroad State Team. My name's Judith Bolker. I'm a volunteer for Californians Abroad and a co-lead for the team, along with Inga. First of all, I want to thank the team, everybody, all the hard work you've done to put this event together. We'll be hearing today from Christina Pascucci, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Katie Porter, and Congressman Adam Schiff, who are all candidates for the California state seat that became available when Dianne Feinstein passed away last year. On screen, you can see the agenda for today's Meet the Candidates event. The candidates will have 5 minutes to introduce themselves, and then we will have questions and answers submitted from you for the participants. And don't worry, you will receive a recording of this event along with links for our upcoming events. But before we introduce you to the candidates, I would like to introduce you to Martha. Martha is the chair of Democrats Abroad Global. She is a fellow Californian, originally from San Francisco, and now lives in Amsterdam. Martha.
Thank you so much, Judith. And it is so wonderful to be here. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be with so many California voters. I love seeing all the different places where you vote. I am from San Francisco and I vote in Oakland, California. I've been a lifelong California voter and living in the Netherlands. And we just have a really wonderful event planned for you today. So thanks so much to the California State Team for organizing this event, as well as our state team's coordinator, Jennifer, for all the support that's being provided, and our communications team. We're going to have most of the candidates that are running for Senate in California. The California primary is on March 5th. But if you're registered to vote from abroad, you should have already received your ballot by now. It should come out on January 20th. So have a look for that. If you're getting it by email, it might be in your spam box. But if you're having any issues getting your ballot, you can reach out to our help desk. So we really want to be there for you. And don't forget, Democrats Abroad has a presidential primary coming up, and we're hosting that in over 100 voting centers around the whole world in 40 different countries. Very exciting. And that'll be from March 5th and through March 12th, 2024. So thank you, and I'll hand over back to Judith.
Thank you so much, Martha. So this race, the election, it's all about voting and turnout. So now I'm going to hand it over to one of our Get Out the Vote volunteers who lives and breathes voter assistance to explain how to cast your vote for this important election. Randi, please.
Thank you, Judith. Hi, everybody. My name is Randi Weitzner. I live in Montreal, Canada. I vote in New York, not in California, but I do GOTV work 24/7. I train DA volunteers to be voter assistants to help answer voters' questions. Helping voters get their ballots back to their county is something DA does exceptionally well. If you're not registered to vote, you can go to votefromabroad.org and fill in the federal postcard application form. For California voters, this must be sent in by mail or fax, no email. If you are already registered to vote, you should get ballots sent automatically. There's no requirement to send in an FPCA to request a ballot. And there on the screen, you can see the California deadlines. However, you should know that protections offered to overseas voters under federal law are tied to sending in that FPCA. You may submit a new federal postcard application form at any time to update your information. This can be sent in by email and done on votefromabroad.org as well. If you have any questions or concerns about your ballot, registering, requesting, you can email us at voterhelp@democratsabroad.org. And on the votefromabroad.org website, there is a red chat button in the bottom right-hand corner on every page, and you can type in there for assistance. In addition, our Zoom room team is going to have a drop-in Zoom room immediately after this webinar. So if you have any questions, you can join us. I think the link is there. If not, you can go to the democratsabroad.org website and look for Zoom the Vote.
All right. Is Congressman Schiff here yet?
Yes, I am.
Beautiful. All right. I am really pleased to introduce you to Congressman Adam Schiff. In 1996, Adam was elected to the California State Senate, and when his term began, he was the Senate's youngest member. Now, in his 12th term in the House of Representatives, Adam serves as the senior member of the House Committee on Judiciary, and we are so pleased with all that he has done. He's on a leave of absence from the House Appropriations Committee, where he remains an ex officio member. So please, Congressman, we are really pleased that you are here, and I'd like to hand it over to Asha Subas to ask the first questions. Asha is from San Francisco and lives in London, England, and serves on our California State Steering Committee. Take it away, Asha.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Congressman Schiff, for taking time to speak with Democrats abroad today. Although we number in the millions, U.S. citizens living outside the country are often overlooked back home, since we are a minority in our individual congressional districts, and our physical absence complicates our ability to conduct activism and raise awareness for our issues. This often is best exemplified by the tax issue for us, which results in policies being designed which have a serious and negative impact on Americans abroad. What more could be done to make sure Americans living outside the U.S. don't suffer the unintended consequences of well-meaning policies that were designed without us in mind?
Thank you for the question, Asha. And let me just say, first of all, that it's wonderful to see you. Thank you all for jumping on the Zoom with me. I probably have a lot more familiarity with Democrats abroad than most members of Congress. Over the years, I've had probably dozens of meetings with Democrats abroad, excuse me, both during my visits around the world and often accompanied by Speaker Pelosi and working to raise money for Democratic candidates throughout the country, but also to meet with Democrats abroad and discuss issues affecting people living overseas, the difficulty with voting, the incredible difficulty with taxes, the complications of FACTA and other reporting requirements. So I'm deeply familiar with these issues, but I'm also deeply familiar with the hard work that you do to make sure that Americans abroad can participate in our elections and do participate and are able to receive their absentee ballot applications and ballots on time. And I know that you have provided some of the critical votes in key states to making sure that we win control in Congress and win the presidency. So I want to begin by thanking you for what you do. As a result of my visits with Democrats abroad, I've become familiar with many of the tax issues in particular that you face. In the last session of Congress, as a result, I was one of only 4 members of Congress, along with Dina Titus, Jamie Raskin, and maybe Don Beyer, who wrote to the Ways and Means Committee, asking that the tax requirements be simplified for people living abroad, that there be a short form so that you don't have to go through the multi-$1,000 expense of hiring people when you owe no taxes. And I also am a co-sponsor of Dina Titus's legislation to establish a commission on tax simplification. But in terms of what more Democrats abroad can do to impress upon members of Congress the unique circumstances and make them more familiar with the difficulties facing people abroad, I would suggest really vehicles just like this. That is, it was much harder in the past before Zoom and other video platforms. I don't know that I've been asked for a meeting, apart from in a campaign context like this, by constituents living abroad via Zoom. Now, I meet with constituents obviously in person all the time and do town halls in person, but we also do telephone town halls. We also do Zoom meetings with constituents. So I would suggest that if you can identify other Democrats abroad that come from a similar place, similar districts, that you make joint requests for meetings with your representatives as a way of impressing upon them the need to address the unique circumstances facing people living overseas. I think it's a terrible shame that we see an increasing number of Americans renouncing their citizenship because it's too expensive and too difficult. But I do want to, if I can take this moment, have a chance to introduce myself to you a little more broadly than in the context of Democrats abroad. You may be familiar with my work as a chair of the Intel Committee, the investigation I did of Donald Trump and the impeachment I led, and the service that I provided on the January 6th committee. But if I could tell you a little bit more about me that goes beyond what you saw on TV or may have seen. I'm originally from back east, originally from the Boston area. We moved to California when I was 11. I lived in the East Bay, and then after law school, moved to Los Angeles, where I've been ever since. I live in Burbank. My wife is named Eve. We are Adam and Eve. We have two kids. Yeah, we have two kids. One is a junior in college, just did his semester abroad in Madrid, and that's our son. And my daughter graduated from college a couple of years ago, and she did her semester abroad in Paris. And I became a prosecutor not too many years after graduating law school, and was a prosecutor in Los Angeles and prosecuted a big oil company for dumping oil in the ocean, established the first environmental crimes unit in Los Angeles, prosecuted drug lords and corrupt public officials. I was later elected to the state Senate. I wrote California's Patient Bill of Rights, took on the health insurance industry to do that. I wrote the legislation to bring up-to-date textbooks to California schools. I was elected to Congress, and in Congress, I brought back millions to California to build affordable housing and shelter for people. I also am known as the father of the Gold Line for authoring the legislation and funding the expansion of mass transit in Los Angeles. I started the early work to get the early earthquake warning system built and got much of the funding for that. And very proud of what I've been able to accomplish in Congress because I think California needs a senator who not only can take on the big fights like I did against a corrupt president, Donald Trump, but also knows how to get things done. And my record of doing both has earned me the support of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and fully 70% of the California House Democrats have endorsed my campaign, which is very unusual when I've got two other wonderful colleagues running. But they made a judgment about who they believe, having worked with all of us, can get things done in the Senate and deliver for California. And I'm really proud to have their support, and I would be proud to have yours. And thanks for inviting me today.
Recording in progress.
Thank you so much, Congressman Schiff, for that. Now, I'd like to introduce Jeff for another question. He votes in your district and lives in France. Are you ready, Jeff? Take it away.
Thank you, Congressman Schiff. Okay, so my question is, a majority of Americans abroad are working and middle class, but are subject to excessively complex filing requirements and tax treatments, more punitive than if we lived in the U.S. Although research confirms that most Americans living abroad do so for reasons related to family, work, and school, we are often dismissed as fat cats who moved abroad to evade taxes. What do you think could be done to make the tax system less unfairly punitive to working and middle-class Americans abroad?
Jeff, thank you for the question. And, I know exactly what you're referring to in terms of Democrats abroad. Probably the most important and most interesting work I did on the Intel Committee was having a chance to visit with a lot of our diplomats abroad, with a lot of our intelligence community professionals, community professionals, and of course to meet their family, meet their spouses, and through them and through Democrats abroad, I've become very familiar with a lot of the challenges people living abroad face, challenges that involve very expensive requirements of hiring people to do tax filings for them when they don't owe taxes, or they're double taxed, or they're treated with a tax system based on their citizenship rather than their residency. And there's a lot, I think, that can be done to make sure that the tax burden is more fair for people living abroad, that it is far more simple for people living abroad. I think Don Beyer has legislation on this that looks very promising. And I also want to see us address a situation that a lot of people have who retire abroad, and that is they paid into Medicare, but they can't access their Medicare benefits. They would have to travel all the way back to the United States to get health care. That makes no sense. And I think that we should begin perhaps with a pilot project where Medicare identifies programs overseas that people can utilize that provide healthcare as cost effectively, if not more cost effectively than Medicare, as a way of making Medicare and healthcare benefits accessible to people who retire overseas. So I think there's a lot that we can do to address these issues, to reduce the tax burden and the complexity of filing, particularly for those that are making less than $400,000 a year. And I want to continue to engage. As I mentioned, I was one of only 4 members of Congress to engage on this issue with the Ways and Means Committee last session. We need a lot more than 4 to be weighing in on this and impressing upon people in these committees the burden that we're placing on people living overseas.
So thank you very much, Congressman Schiff. One last question. Will you join the Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus? This is the caucus led by Congresswoman Titus. It's a low commitment caucus, and it's just so you can stay in the loop on issues and that affect Californians living abroad and demonstrate your support.
Absolutely. I would be very happy to join the caucus. And Dina was, as I mentioned, the one I worked on that correspondence to the Ways and Means Committee last session. And I'm supporting and co-sponsoring her legislation to establish a commission to simplify and reduce the tax burden on people living overseas. So be delighted to join the caucus. And if I could also, I do want to mention, because this conversation that I had some years ago really comes back to me in this moment. Shortly after Donald Trump was elected, I did a Zoom just like this with Democrats abroad in Tokyo. And I remember it was, I think, 6 a.m. in the morning where I was in DC, and about 6 p.m. And I was looking on my computer screen to a cocktail reception in Tokyo. And the first question I got from Democrats abroad in Tokyo was, when this presidency is over, how do we assure our Japanese friends that this is not going to happen again? And I remember saying at the time, you won't be able to assure them. The only thing that will assure them is the size of the repudiation, that is, the size of the vote to oust him, which would take place later, and the passage of time. Well, here we are, time has passed, and we are right back where we were. And the threat of another Trump presidency, I don't need to tell you about, because you see it, you hear it, you have to explain to people every day what the hell is going on in America. I am deeply concerned that our democracy is once again in grave peril. We're going to beat Donald Trump because we have to beat Donald Trump. Another Trump presidency would be the end of our democracy as we know it, and it would be the end of our relationship with so many of our NATO allies, who would then go on to have to hedge their bets with China, and it would be utterly catastrophic. And I remember during the first few weeks of the Trump presidency going to the Munich National Security Conference with John McCain. And one of the wonderful things about traveling with John McCain is that he could invite anybody he wanted to come to dinner, and they would come. And so we had dinner the first night of the conference with Bill Gates and Bono, not my usual dinner company. And as the dinner wore on, and we were, of course, at a brewery in Munich, the drinking went on, started telling jokes, and Bono told a joke about being Irish. And then he became very serious. And he said, I'm very proud of Ireland. I'm very proud to be Irish. But Ireland, like most countries, is just a country. America is also an idea. And I remember thinking at the time, again, just a few weeks into the Trump presidency, that this is what was at risk with that presidency, the very idea of our country, how people around the world perceived us, how we perceived ourselves. And that idea, I think, has been badly shaken. The view of America around the world has been badly shaken. I think when we defeat him again, as we must, and in order to defeat him, we're going to need every vote of Democrats abroad to do it. I think the Republicans will finally move on and decide that he's been a disaster for their party. They lost with him in 2018 and again in 2020. They lost with him in 2022. And when they lose with him again in 2024, I think they will finally decide, if not for the sake of our country, then just maybe for the sake of their party, they need to move on because he's a loser. And we desperately need them to move on, to return to being a party of ideology. Really, any ideology will do. So I want to thank you for what you do to carry that idea of America around the world, even when it is not represented. It wasn't represented in the former president of the United States. And thank you for what you will do in the fall to make sure that he is never president again.
Thank you so very much, Congressman Schiff. Your message is loud and clear. Our vote from abroad is so important. And we're going to have a question and answer period after this Zoom. So thank you again. And
Thank you.
I am pleased right now to introduce Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Barbara Lee has been representing California's 12th district since 1998. She's the highest ranking African-American woman appointed to Democratic leadership, serving as co-chair of the Policy and Steering Committee. She also serves on the Budget Committee and the powerful Appropriations Committee, which oversees all federal government spending. We are honored to have you here with us today. Congresswoman Lee, welcome. So please.
With you. Can you hear me?
We can,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, nice being with you. And first, thank you for giving us a chance to speak with you. And also to give you a little bit about my background and who I am as a person, a woman, and also as a member of Congress. You know, I actually will start by just saying how grateful I am for Democrats abroad and for what you're doing, living in countries outside of the United States, because you all are truly the best ambassadors that we have. I actually lived in Great Britain for 2 years. My son was born in London. My former husband was in the Air Force, stationed at a base. It was right near Banbury, called Upper Hayford. And it was during that period that, and you know, being a minority in America, what that means. And so it was during that period that I realized I was part of the world community. And I was not necessarily a minority, but I was part of the entire world. And there were so many people I met who looked like me. And that is when I started getting interested in and working on international and foreign policy issues wherever I was working or whatever I was doing, whether it was in college. I attended Mills College in Oakland, California, University of California at Berkeley. And I have my bachelor's in psychology and my master's in social work, MSW. And so wherever I am and whatever I was doing, foreign affairs and international relations was just part of my life and part of my work. And so having said that, Democrats abroad, and when I travel, I seek out Democrats abroad because I know uh, some of the issues that you're dealing with, but also it's just really great to hear your stories and to learn more about being a world citizen and to just see how you're doing, first of all, because you may not know it, but on the Appropriations Committee, when Democrats were in the majority, I chaired the subcommittee that funded our State Department. This is the subcommittee on state and foreign operations, our embassy security, our all of our development and humanitarian assistance, all of our consular services, USAID, our Green Climate Fund, Global Climate Fund, all of the investments that the United States makes in the non-defense side. I chaired that committee. And so I had the privilege to work with a lot of you on a lot of issues abroad. Finally, I'll just say I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, moved to California, Southern California, Pacoima, San Fernando. And as an African-American girl, I wanted to be a cheerleader. And I think the story is important for you to know because so much of what I do is fighting to make sure that we have an inclusive society where everyone has a seat at the table. And I wanted to be a cheerleader, but there was a selection process. I couldn't meet that criteria for the selection of me as a girl cheerleader. So I went to the NAACP and I asked them to help me. They looked and they saw that, yes, I would never be a cheerleader. And I organized the student body, and we finally got the student body and the administration to change this selection process to an election. And so I tried out in front of the student body. And so guess what? I won. I was the first Black cheerleader at San Fernando High School. And that opened the door for other Black and brown girls to become cheerleaders. So fast forward to what I'm doing now, and what I have done is really breaking down barriers through legislation, through funding. And in fact, I was in the California legislature. Pete Wilson, who's a Republican, signed probably more bills of mine into law than any other legislator, such as the Violence Against Women Act. That was my bill. California Schools Hate Crime Reduction Act, because I wanted to make sure that our LGBTQ plus kids weren't dealing with still with what we're dealing with now, hate. And I had to introduce that bill 3 times before he vetoed it because he wanted me to take out sexual orientation. So I have a long legislative history working with Democrats and Republicans. When I went to Congress, the HIV/AIDS pandemic was wreaking havoc on the lives of people, mainly African Americans in our own country and in Africa. So I went to President Bush and talked to him about it. Bottom line, you may have heard of PEPFAR, the Global Fund, and I did work with Bono and with world leaders to get the PEPFAR legislation passed and signed into law. And that was my effort. And I was so proud because now we have saved 25 million lives. We still have a long way to go to achieve an AIDS-free generation. But that's an example of how even though I am a Democrat, a progressive Democrat, I work with whomever, which will work together where we find common ground to get the job done and to deliver for Californians and for the rest of the country. So just thank you all again for inviting me to be with you. Really good to see all of you, get to know you, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lee. That's really an amazing story that you shared with us. I'm happy to ask Martha to come back now and ask another question for you. Martha is the Global Democrats Abroad Chair. So please.
Thank you so much, Judith. And I'm really pleased to be here with Congresswoman Lee. I am myself an Oakland voter, so I vote in your district. Yay, and great to see you again.
Thank you.
Really, really glad to be able to ask you the first question. And so, given Democrats abroad's high profile globally, Americans abroad will often come to us when they are unable to get through to their local consulate or embassy. And the most common problems that Americans abroad ask for assistance are around voting, but also filing taxes and accessing their Social Security benefits and renewing U.S. passports. How do you think that the U.S. citizen services at consulates and embassies could be improved?
Well, thanks a lot for that question. And let me tell you, as one who funds all of these, the consular services, I know what exactly you're talking about, especially now as the impacts of COVID are still with us. And I think we have to increase the number of staff. That's the first thing. Under Donald Trump, the staffing positions were not filled, and we still are not staffed up. And so we need to, again, in the budget process, and we're in the process of negotiating a new budget. And when I was the chair of the committee, we put additional investments in so we could staff up, so you wouldn't have to go through what you go through. Secondly, you may not know it in terms of my office, but I'm a social worker. I mentioned earlier by profession, but we do a lot of casework. And it's up to myself until we get these offices funded. And in the Senate, I will fight to make sure that we get the level of funding that we need, because right now, the politics of what's going on. But we do casework. And so the resources for our diplomats and consular officials, while we're not fully funded yet because of the politics, individuals, and I know most Democrats especially, will provide those kind of advocacy and constituent services until we get the offices staffed up.
Great. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lee. I'm now going to hand it over to Joy, who's also from California, and Joy lives in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Hi, Congresswoman Lee.
Hi, Joy.
I'd like to ask you about Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
U.S. citizens residing outside the country are unable to use the Medicare that they paid into without costly travel back to the U.S., as I'm sure you know. And this has implications for fairness and cost to the Medicare system. President Biden signed the 2021 and 2022 appropriations allocated for a Medicare portability pilot program, but the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation have not moved it forward. What do you think can be done to kickstart the pilot?
Yeah, we did include that. CMS did provide a report, and I'm not really impressed with the report, so I'm going to press more for a detailed explanation of the costs and the potential savings. But of course, I support Medicare for all. So, part of what I have worked on for many, many years is healthcare. And so in the Senate, of course, I would fight to make sure that the recommendations that we finally will get, which makes sense, I would support and really work to make sure that we include in our budget, because it's really unfair. And I think that it's a study is good. We asked for the study, the feasibility study. But again, it's not adequate. And so I want to see a real study that lists the costs and potential savings, and try to escalate this and move it forward. Again, being on the committee, I'm on the Labor, Health, and Human Services Committee also. We have the opportunity to push this harder. Excuse me. And I want to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Congresswoman. And we have one last question for you. Will you join our caucus? As mentioned earlier, this is the caucus led by Congressman Titus. It's a low commitment caucus. Sounds like you're pretty busy, and it will allow you to stay in the loop on our issues and demonstrate your support for Americans abroad.
I really should be a member. We contacted Congresswoman Titus's office, and I think I've joined already. And knowing that this is a caucus I should have been involved in early on, because I do so much international work and I travel so much and meet with so many Democrats abroad. So yes, I think I've already joined it. And thank you for raising this with us, because it's so important that, again, being you all being our best ambassadors, and my being the ranking member of the committee that funds so much of what we're talking about, that I be a member of the caucus. So thank you again, but I'm sure that we have joined already.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Lee. And yeah, there we go. So
Okay.
I really appreciate that you've already joined the caucus. That's terrific. And thank you so much, Martha and Joy. We greatly appreciate the time that you took to join us today. And good luck. And don't
Okay.
forget to remind Californians abroad to vote. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Love your support. Really appreciate being with you this morning. Thank you for all.
Thank you again for joining us.
Okay. Bye-bye.
And now I'm really pleased to introduce Congresswoman Katie Porter. Ah, there she is. Yay. Hi, Katie. We are
Good
so
morning
glad-
or good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Sorry about the little delay. We're happy you're here. Please let us hear all about you and what your plans are.
All right. For those of you I haven't had the chance to speak with before at other Democrats Abroad gatherings, let me introduce myself. The San Francisco Chronicle once called me Congress's single mom and watchdog. And both of those things are true. I live here in Irvine, where I am raising 3 lightly supervised children, one of whom is having breakfast here in the background as he gets ready for school. The second part is about being a watchdog is also true. I really love oversight. My minivan here in California has vanity license plates that spell it out, OVRSITE. And believe me when I tell you that when you have those license plates, you must drive so carefully. I know that when most Americans think about Congress, particularly in this polarized environment, they think about speeches, they think about people going back and forth, they think about gridlock on the legislation that matters. And I think that polarized political environment makes the tool of oversight all the more important. So cabinet secretaries, corporate CEOs are some of the most powerful and frankly thoughtful people in America. Oversight is about holding those people accountable to you, not just giving speeches, but getting answers, not just speaking truth to power, but getting these powerful people to admit the truth. And so in congressional hearings, I only have 5 minutes to hold witnesses to account and try to get them to shape up. So, for example, in the early days in March 2020 of the COVID-19 pandemic, I questioned the CDC director about why he refused to make COVID testing free for all Americans. I told him that he had the authority to do it. We had an existing law on the books, and he waffled. He told me he needed time to operationalize. I persisted, and I got him to use his power to make testing free, and that was a very powerful weapon in the fight against COVID. We didn't need to pass a law. We needed someone who held Washington to account to use the laws that we already had. Another example is when I went toe-to-toe with Jamie Dimon, CEO of Chase Bank, about how a teller working at his bank and living in California would not be able to make ends meet, even on a shoestring budget. I used a whiteboard to put that person's budget out for Mr. Dimon, and then I asked him, as one of the most powerful business leaders in America, and as at the time the president of the Business Roundtable, what should this employee do about it? What can you do about it? How should we solve this problem in America? He said he'd have to think about it. He didn't have any answer. And his competitor, Bank of America, a couple months later, raised their wages to $20 an hour, forcing Chase to follow suit. So it's no secret that I love whiteboards. I have several of them sitting right here, actually. But the important thing, I think, is about why I'm willing to wield that whiteboard. And the reason is that I have never been for sale. I am the only candidate, only elected official in this Senate race who has never taken corporate PAC money, ever, in any race, not one penny. I didn't change my position on campaign finance reform to boost my credibility in this race. It is core to who I am, why I went to Washington, and why I do Congress differently. So corporate PAC money corrupts Washington. It corrupts our agenda there. It corrupts decisions. It also deeply erodes confidence in our democracy. The same thing is true for money from federal lobbyists. I'm the only person in this race who does not take it. And that is part of why Californians will trust that I will put their interests ahead of the interest of powerful special interests, particularly corporate special interests. So I think we deserve a senator who doesn't just talk about democracy. We deserve a senator who has acted, who has led to strengthen our democracy, showing as I can that a grassroots army can defeat corporate special interests. So right now in the Senate especially, I think we are not having the conversations and not taking the votes that we need to deliver for Californians and for the American people. Our elected leaders spend too much time talking about how to get the corporate America richer rather than talking about how to create a fair economy and how to help us all make ends meet and get ahead. So I think one of the things that distinguishes me in this race is I am very forward looking. I am focused on having a fresh vision for both Washington, but also for how Californians get their agenda items to the top of Washington. And of course, at the top of that agenda has to be the issue of workforce housing, affordable housing, being able to attract and retain people here in California, as well as fighting climate change. I've heard a lot that Democrats need a stronger message on the economy. And look, we do. Nearly 90% of what Congress people talked about last year was something other than the number one issue in this election. And it's the same number one issue in every election, which is jobs, the economy, the middle class. So I have won 3 really tough races in Orange County by exposing corporate price gouging, by standing up to special interests like Big Pharma, harmful interests like big oil, and calling out executives and government officials who shortchange us. I know how to talk about the economy in a way that lets voters know that I know the truth, that I hear them, and that I will get it. And that authenticity and passion is not only going to help me win this Senate race, it's also going to make me an effective messenger for Democrats around the country and up and down the ballot here in California. What is the goal? What is the work of a blue state senator? It is to help us deliver durable Democratic majorities. So you are never going to hear me say, I'm not up this cycle. I'm not going to coast on California's Democratic Party lean. I am a strong, avid, effective campaigner, and I am going to be out there engaging the very voters that Democrats need. Overseas voters, you guys know all about that. We simply do not reach out to you, and we're leaving votes on the table for our party. Younger voters, Latino voters, API voters, swing voters, never Trump Republicans. I have a track record in this polarized environment of going into every corner, talking to every kind of voter and being able to win them. So as a blue state senator, I want to go and be effective on the stump, be effective campaigning. I was a 9-year 4-H'er. I can go help John Tester in Montana. I was a consumer protection attorney. I can go to Ohio for Sherrod Brown and help us here in California. I know exactly how to communicate to win those House races we need to win a durable Democratic majority, to win back the House and to hang on to it. So Californians have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to elect a policy leader who will make their biggest challenges, housing and climate, Washington's biggest challenge, but also we are electing a political leader, somebody who can be effective in this polarized political environment, connecting with and persuading and engaging the very voters that we need to win. So I hope Californians will pick the right woman for the job, and I'm very excited to have a chance to take your questions.
Katie, thank you so much. Thank you for fighting for all of us. And I'd like to now hand this over for Inga, who is a fellow California state team lead. She lives in Woodside and lives in London. I don't know if I have to say England. I think everybody knows London, England. Inga has
there's London in Ontario. I'm very careful.
okay. So Inga has a question for you about voting rights.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Congresswoman. And your comments about democracy and about voting and how we're going to make a difference really feed into the question I want to ask next. The right to vote for Americans abroad is protected under federal law, but we face barriers to exercise that right, even in California. Many states make it difficult to vote from abroad by requiring ballot return by unreliable international mail. We experience geo-blocking government websites, and these prevent people abroad from being able to register and prevent Americans who have never resided from voting. So there's a multiple number of issues. How do you think access to voting abroad can be improved? And is this something that you would want to address? Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. I've actually had an opportunity to do some learning about this issue because I serve on the House Oversight Committee, which has jurisdiction over this issue, and have worked carefully with our former chair, Carolyn Maloney, who, as you may know, is the head of the Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus, talking about what we can do. So we definitely need to pass federal protection for Americans abroad. State by state is not the approach to get there. And so I think one of the things we need to do is to ban states from engaging in practices that effectively or fully disenfranchise Americans living abroad. At the same time, I think we need to provide incentives for states to engage in the kinds of changes to their election system that will help people living abroad. So the example of the geo-blocking on the websites, when you get your mail ballots, is always a big challenge if you do get them. Getting them too close to even get them returned in time. And so I think that there are solutions. I know there's a bill on this that I think I co-sponsored last Congress. I'm not sure if it's been introduced this Congress, but I had a conversation with Carolyn Maloney because I actually wanted to carry the bill this Congress. And so I think it is important that we pass that act that would do some of the things that we can do to address this issue. But I also think this is both a legal problem, but also a political problem, which is it is always going to be a little bit more difficult to vote when you are abroad than when you can wake up and go to the polling place and you have all those visual reminders of voting. We can make the voting itself easier through letting you do it electronically in secure means, but we have to still do the political work of engaging people living abroad, persuading them, telling them what's going on, helping them know what the issues are, and making sure their voices are heard. So I think it's important to work on this both from a political standpoint, which is having a real plan as part of every campaign, particularly bigger national campaigns, statewide campaigns like this one. How are you going to engage voters abroad? But also making sure that we're breaking down those legal barriers.
Thank you for that answer. And of course, engaging Americans abroad and getting them to vote and making the process better is exactly what Democrats Abroad is about. So you are singing our song when it comes to that. I'd like to turn over now to Susan Fatucci from France, who votes in Los Angeles County, and she'll ask the next question.
Hello, I'm sorry. My lighting is very bad in my living room. Hello, and I'm thrilled to meet you, Katie Porter. Sorry. I have a question for you on behalf of the Veterans Military Family Caucus and myself. My question is, among all the veterans struggling to access their benefits, those living abroad often face an especially uphill climb. Will you commit to working for veterans living abroad, including those with service-connected disabilities, to ensure they receive their earned benefits? Sorry.
Yep. Thank you so much for your question, Susan. I've actually had the chance to hear firsthand from veterans about these issues and have continued to stay in touch. For example, with Sean Winter, who I met when I visited the American American Veterans Cemetery in Italy, and he has shared with me how difficult it is to access VA care, to get equivalent care, to show the VA that you're not able to get there. So I think we need to think about how to break down these barriers. I think that there is an effort to push to improve VA care generally. But I think one of the things we have been trying to do in Congress as Democrats is recognize that there's no one veteran typical veteran. There's no one typical veteran experience. So if you think about the VA of yesteryear, they didn't have OBGYNs, they didn't have women's reproductive care, they didn't have enough mental health care, they weren't necessarily treating all aspects of health. And so I think we need to think about the same thing. So we've done things, for example, here in the States to make it easier for veterans who have healthcare needs that maybe could not be met through the traditional VA to go and get them. And I think we need to take that same approach and apply it abroad. I also know that it is difficult to receive benefits checks and to sort out those issues. And so I have heard about some of these things firsthand, and I would love to work with you on more solutions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one final question for you. And we've been asking all the other candidates this very same question. Will you join the Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus? This is to stay in the loop on our issues and demonstrate support for California abroad.
So I absolutely will join. I actually think I have been a member in the past, but then I couldn't find it today on my own website. So I was like, wait a minute, like, why are they asking me this? I'm a member. So we have to rejoin. So I'm going to make sure I'm in it. But I also want to say, I think this illustrates an important structural point about Washington, which is that we don't have a Congressional Americans Abroad caucus in the Senate. And when we do sometimes create Senate caucuses, the two shall never meet. So I think for this issue, as for so many, the solution here is to create a bicameral and hopefully, if possible, bipartisan caucus so that we have senators, House members, Republicans, Democrats all working together on this issue, because we're going to need the Senate to be informed about this vote. I think we have House members who have districts where there are higher concentrations of people living abroad. But I think having that bicameral caucus, so the goal here, I think, is not only to join it as a House member, but and not to just create a new one in the Senate, but to create one that brings members together so that we can leverage the power of those of us who care about and know about this issue to push the agenda forward.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a real delight to have you with us today. Good luck on the campaign trail. And
thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Christina Pascucci. She is a native and lifelong Californian, a TV broadcaster, a community advocate, and an expectant mother whose life reflects a steadfast commitment to the well-being of Californians. She's an Emmy award-winning journalist and a licensed pilot. She's also fluent in Spanish and now a candidate for Senate. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be joining you. And I just love this group. I want to hear all of your stories and what brought you abroad. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my background and why I decided to get into this race. I'm obviously probably a lesser known candidate in the political world. And I am currently 7.5 months pregnant. So doing this, fighting for my future daughter and her generation. And just since you're probably not as familiar with me as you are with some of the other candidates, I want to take you back to the beginning and kind of share who I am and my heart with you. So I started, when I was around 10 years old, I had a sister who was much older than me, and she suffered with a lot of mental health and substance abuse issues. And there was one particular moment, traumatic moment when I was around 10 that shifted my worldview, that good people do bad things. And it led me down this journey of wanting to understand how people work, the psychology behind how we end up where we are. What if she had had mental health resources earlier on? How would that have changed the trajectory of her life and really her entire future? And it made me passionate about telling people stories to try to stop this othering, which we're seeing now more than ever, right? So after that point, I was perpetually curious. I ended up being a journalist for nearly 20 years. I traversed all of California. I interviewed thousands of people, any given topic. I've done dozens of investigations on it. And then I traveled to more than 100 countries across 7 continents and interviewed world leaders, everyone from His Holiness the Dalai Lama multiple times, including in Dharamshala and his palace, to former President Donald Trump and in between. And I am very passionate about people and cultures and just closing that gap, because there's so much misunderstanding of our fellow human. And so I'm very passionate about bridging that gap and storytelling. And there's a lot of things I care about in terms of issues that are plaguing our state and our country. I think we need to get back to the foundational issues like education, for example. America remains one of the more illiterate first world countries. And so how do we address that? That bleeds into so many other things, whether it's mental health, or you're exponentially more likely as a child, if you're not reading at grade level by third grade, to end up homeless or in jail. And right now, 60 to 70% of kids in California aren't reading at grade level by third grade. So I'm passionate about that. I'm also advocating for addressing the mental health crisis. I heard we were talking about veterans a few moments ago. I'm passionate about our veterans and addressing their mental health and making sure that they have all the services that they need. But we're facing a mental health crisis across populations in our country. And so that's a huge priority for me and a pillar of my campaign. I think I'm one of the only candidates who's making that a pillar of my campaign. Also, I'm uniquely positioned having my international experience and foreign policy experience. I was a war correspondent. I covered war in Ukraine, Armenia, the Middle East. I was the only candidate to visit Israel recently during this conflict with Gaza. And I spent a lot of time in Latin America. As you guys referenced earlier, I speak Spanish. And I'm, as a millennial and the only millennial candidate who's polling, I am committed to making sure we're addressing the AI threat. AI is incredibly beneficial. It can help us fight things like cancer, but it also poses one of the greatest threats to humanity, and that's coming from the words of the people who invented it. So I think that we really need to pay closer attention to that as well. It reminds me of December of 2019 when the COVID train was coming, and no one really knew how the world was about to change or paid attention. And I think that's what we're going to see with AI too. So I'm one of the only candidates that's talked about that, and that is really technologically savvy as well, which is an important piece. And I look forward to speaking to you guys about just what I plan to do to engage voters abroad and make sure that your voice is heard, because it's so important. And right now, the numbers are really low for those who are actually able to cast their votes. So thank you so much for hearing me out, the lesser known candidate, but I'm proud that we're one of 6 who are polling and we're fighting the good fight. I love people and I'm here to serve the people truly. And that's what I'm fighting for. Just, an America where the rest of the world respects us once again, because I think, as a lot of you will see, people have been asking lately, what's going on with America? And so it starts at the top with leaders who are able to exude respect and be inspirational leaders, and maybe not the more of the same of what we've seen in the past, people who perpetuate polarization. We really need people to step up to the plate and who are willing to reach across the aisle more than ever. I think the future of our country depends on it.
Thank you very much for letting us know your plans for your candidacy. It sounds like you've got great plans ahead. I'd like to hand it over now to Katie, who votes in West Hollywood and lives in Brussels. She has a question for you about voting.
Great.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Katie.
Hi. First of all, I also would say I'm a mother of 2 young people in university, and some of the issues you raised actually really resonate with me. So I absolutely agree on the issues you're raising. So thank you for that. As Judith mentioned, I'm going to ask you a question we also asked Katie Porter, something very specific to Democrats abroad. Many states, and we believe even some counties in California, make it really difficult to vote from abroad. For instance, they require us to return our ballots by international mail, quite unreliable, or they even use geo-blocking in their websites, which prevents people abroad from registering and basically blocks people, our children especially, who've never resided in the United States, from voting. How do you think access to voting could be improved for people abroad?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Katie. A big part of what I did as a journalist was expose kind of the inefficiencies in our government systems. And as a candidate for United States Senate, I've seen a lot of those inefficiencies firsthand. I covered every election and a lot of the issues with voting. So this is something that is extremely important. And I was looking at the numbers. I think there's 3 million eligible voters abroad and only 4.5% who cast their ballot. So that's something like 130,000 or so people who are voting when, I mean, that's such a missed opportunity for so many people. And I think it speaks to the issue that you're addressing with how difficult it is. So one thing that I would do is have someone in my office who has an open line and direct line of communication with Democrats abroad to make sure that we're hearing your concerns. A huge part of what I've done as a journalist, and that I think is incredibly critical, is making sure all voices are represented at the table so that you guys aren't being left out. And you know, there are well-intended policies perhaps or changes to the system that don't take our voters abroad in mind. So one would be having a direct line of communication. So as issues arise, you can let us know and we can take action right away to kind of just like cut that bureaucracy. There's way too much bureaucracy in government, as we see. And the political will just to be aware of this problem, to also as a journalist, a big part of that role is storytelling and putting a face to the problem. So explaining to my colleagues, like, you know, this is a very important issue. And I spoke to, you know, these people abroad and this is what they're facing right now. And I think that storytelling helps humanize the issue rather than it seeming kind of like this nebulous number or statistic, so to speak. So also electronically secure means of voting is very important, making sure that it is safe and accessible. That is something that I would have my office look into. So raising the awareness around the issue, having the political will, engaging voters abroad, making sure there's an electronically secure means if that is the best way in which to do it, and having a direct line to my office are all things that would be on the table. And I'm open to any other suggestions if there's anything specific that you guys have seen that you think would be helpful.
I think I'm going to hand over the mic, but I do think it's also an issue not just within California, but the point is it's a national issue. So, you know, as a senator, as a national senator, it should be addressed really centrally. But anyway,
yes.
Thank you for your response, and I wanted to hand it over to my colleague Asha Subas, who will ask you another question.
Thank you. And just to be clear, that's what I mean when I say talking to my colleagues in the Senate and making sure it's a federally addressed issue, which would be my role as U.S. Senator. Thank you so much.
Hello, and thank you so much for appearing with us today. Although we number in the millions, U.S. citizens living outside the country are often overlooked back home, since we are a minority in our individual congressional districts, and our physical absence complicates our ability to conduct activism and raise awareness for our issues. This often is best exemplified by our tax issues, but results in general in policies being designed which have a serious and negative impact on Americans abroad. What more could be done to make sure Americans living outside the United States don't suffer the unintended consequences of well-meaning policies that were designed without us in mind? Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. There are so many examples of that where there are well-intended policies that end up hurting people. And I bring it back to having the direct line of communication open, having someone in my office who deals directly with Democrats abroad, always to hear your voices and concerns directly and cut that bureaucracy is very important. Also, I know that you guys fight or you galvanize on different issues like the Women's March or different things around the world. And I think shining a light also on what you do and your work would be something that I would love to engage with you on, because I don't know how many, I mean, I know you guys are a very well-known and respected group, but I feel like magnifying your message would only help put forth the issues that you care about most. So those would be the two things, is working with you on some of the actions that you're taking around the globe, and also making sure that you have that direct line of communication so that any policy that we're working on that would impact voting or otherwise, you have a seat at the table.
Thank you so much for that and appearing with us today. And I think for the last question, I'm handing it back to Judith.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much, Asha. And thank you, so much, Christina. We have one last question for you, and it's a question we've asked everybody. Will you join the Americans Abroad caucus as well? If you-
Yes. Yes, I heard you ask that question, and for me, it was a no-brainer, of course. And this is actually a space that I'm particularly passionate about is working with people abroad and on issues abroad. So I appreciate the question, and yes, I would. When's the
Beautiful. Great. Well, thank you again for spending some time with us. Wish you a lot of luck on the campaign trail, and may you have a very easy delivery. And
Thank you. I
and
appreciate you.
yeah, of course. Thank you. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been really great, hasn't it? I've loved hearing from all the congressmen and women and from Christina Pascucci. We'll be emailing you the recording for this webinar shortly, along with all the links so that you can sign up to be a volunteer for Californians Abroad, as well as the link to our February 21st event with Betty Yee and Cassandra Chavez. Don't forget to vote. Each candidate spoke about how important it is. So don't forget to go to votefromabroad.org to request your ballot to vote in this really important election. If you want to get one-on-one voting help right after this call, you can go to bit.ly/Zoom the vote, or just click on the link in the chat box and you can join that event right now. So have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.